IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Welcome everyone to another episode of All Things Policy from Takshashila Institution. Today we are going to discuss about variants of the coronavirus. Our listeners would have come across Delta variant, which is in the news currently. It is thought that this particular variant of coronavirus is probably responsible for the current wave of the COVID cases all over the world. There are other variants like Alpha, Gamma, Beta, along with Delta. Now, these variants arise due to mutations in the genomic material of a virus. And coronavirus is not actually unique to this. It's a phenomenon observed across many different viruses. The Spanish influenza that the world got hit after the First World War also had such variants. Also, the common flu that we humans contract almost every year has a lot of variants. It's the phenomenon in the common cold virus is almost yearly. A new variant seems to appear every year or every season, and that is one of the reasons that humans need to take a flu shot every season or every year. Now, there are different techniques that are present that can be used to identify a different variant of a virus, and we are going to discuss that technique along with the policy aspect on this podcast today. So today, for this podcast, I have Shambhavi with me, who heads the Health and Life Science program at Takshashila, and we have a new member, Priyal, who has joined the research team recently. So welcome, Shambhavi and Priyal. Let's begin.
Thanks, Ruturaj. It is quite an opportune time to talk about genome sequencing, genome surveillance of COVID variants. Obviously, the world continues to remain in the grasp of the Delta variant. We knew the kind of destruction it caused in India. But it is also, it's not just about the science, but it's the policies that follow. We actually covered this topic in the second workshop of the graduate program in health and policy a couple of weeks ago. And it is just such a big mess of tangles in how we have various government departments which are involved in this. We have a lot of private sector that wants to get involved but is not, and we'll speak about that a bit later in the podcast. But just that we have got different teams who are doing sequencing, we have different teams who are calling for the public health measures, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of crosstalk. So from a public policy point of view, this is a very interesting space for us to actually tackle and talk about. Just in case you want to be part of further conversations on interesting topics such as this, our courses are actually open for applications. The deadline is tomorrow, that is 28th August. This is for the September cohort. We do offer 12-week graduate certificate programs in public policy, defense and foreign affairs, technology and policy, and health and life sciences. These are all online and you can take them from anywhere. To find out more about our courses, do visit www.takshashila.org.in/courses. But getting back to the topic at hand, genomic surveillance is now critical for us to fight back COVID-19 because the one thing we have to do is ensure that we can track any emerging variants and contain them before they spread. Like we saw what happened with the Delta variant as it spread through India earlier this year. In fact, ICMR has released data that said that Delta and Kappa variants constituted 60% of infections detected in Maharashtra during Jan and Feb 2021, and it's just the fact that this variant came in, but even it could infect people who had been vaccinated. So now there is data that shows that 86% of breakthrough infections, that is infections occurring in people who have been completely vaccinated against the original COVID-19 variant, 86% of those cases have been caused by this emerging Delta variant. So it is extremely critical that we keep a tab on this. Ruturaj, let me just get back to you on how do we actually go about figuring out variants? What is this genomic surveillance? What does it entail?
Yeah, so the first step of genomic surveillance is genomic sequencing of the genetic material of any virus. Now, in the case of coronavirus, it is the RNA because it's an RNA virus. So, what is done is that as one would contribute a sample for routine testing for RT-PCR, similarly, a sample would be collected from a person, the deceased, and then instead of just doing the RT-PCR test, which looks at just two genes, the entire genome is sequenced. So all the genes are sequenced from that particular sample. And this is the first step. And after sequencing of the entire genome, it is then compared with existing, reference genomes of the same virus to see is there any difference in terms of the genetic sequence. That is, are there any new mutations in the new sample that I'm comparing? Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is a very common phenomenon observed across various viruses. And another aspect I would like to bring here is that not all mutations are going to lead to a change in the character of the virus. So after sequencing and after comparing it with a reference genome, there is another step, that is one needs to do some certain other correlation studies to actually see whether the proteins, the code proteins especially, that are responsible for the entry of the virus, are they actually changing? Is the protein capsid actually changing, which is leading to a different properties to the virus? So two steps at an individual sample level are required. But apart from that, what matters is that how many samples I am actually collecting and analyzing, and how cleverly I am collecting these samples, because these variants might emerge from anywhere, from any individual based on different types of hosts. So the main challenge is not the technique, not the protocols that are required for genomic isolation and sequencing, but larger strategy of how to collect it, at what frequency to collect it, from which populations to collect it, and so on and so forth.
Excellent. So I think if we look at it from the scientific point of view, we are saying that there is strategy on which samples you collect, how frequently you collect it, and then you actually do the genome sequencing. Possible barriers there are obviously first, your strategy has to be responsive. B, you have to have enough sequencing capacity to actually sequence all of the genomes that you want to. And then C, obviously, once you have sequenced them and you put them up onto a database, it is also to characterize these variants, because there can be thousands, right? So not all variants are problematic from a public health point of view. Some mutations might just be silent. They might not really change anything in terms of the characteristics of the virus. So currently, for example, we have the four variants that you spoke about, which are the variants of concern according to WHO, which is the alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. But we also have variants of interest, eta, iota, kappa, and lambda, which are another four variants. Those are just the variants that we have to keep an eye out on. But it's also possible that there might be other variants that come in. And once we see those variants, it is up to the scientific community to figure out, is this something that can become as deadly as the Delta variant, or will it just die out on its own because it's not conferring any sort of advantage to the virus, right?
Yes, exactly. So as you said, there are theoretically hundreds of variants possible. And this leads to sort of the next question, or the logical next question rather, that this cannot be a one-time thing. It has to be a very thought-out, routine monitoring effort. So the word genomic surveillance that we are using is actually very apt, because just like a surveillance that we might think of other entities, we need to have these mechanisms that are always functioning, looking out for variants in nearly all possible corners of the world. Of course, genomic surveillance is being done all over the world. That's how we came to know about the new variants. So what I wanted to ask you, Shambhavi, are there any efforts in India? Is the government of India running such a program, or are there any private entities or research organizations that have been roped in for this?
Thanks, Ruturaj. So yes, we do have a program that has been constituted under the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare and the Department of Biotechnology under the Ministry of Health, Science and Technology. It's known as the INSACOG program, the Indian SARS-CoV-2 Genomics Consortium, in short, INSACOG. And it was constituted sort of December, Jan earlier this year. And it started off with 10 laboratories. Currently, it has, I think, it covers about 28 laboratories which do the genomic surveillance. These are all, at this point of time, government labs, though there have been reports that some of these labs do outsource sequencing to a few private companies as well. They have over 300 Sentinel sites from where they get the samples. But we are, by estimates that have been officially put out, only looking at 1% of all the positive samples that we get have been profiled for genomic sequencing, whereas our target is 5%. However, if you look at the actual data, we think that the actual number of samples that have been sequenced and have been submitted is about 0.1% of positive samples. So we are not anywhere close to the amount of samples that we need to be sequencing. We need to be sequencing about 5% of all positive samples that we get. We are not sure about the strategy that has been used for identifying the samples that go for sequencing as of yet. But we know the challenges, which include that sample quality is not always great. Poor quality samples cannot be used for sequencing. So that's one problem. And the other is obviously capacity. We do need to expand on capacity. And I think we can try to address those questions on how India can improve genomic surveillance after this short break.
Hey, everybody, let me tell you a little bit about what happened on the IVM Podcast Network this week. We've had some amazing stuff, right? I mean, I don't know if you're aware of the redoing or the rebranding of the Traveling Professors show. We called it now Smarter with Sid with Siddharth Deshmukh. This week he examines Netflix getting into e-commerce, and will this affect how Amazon's dominating the space? Also, let me give you another quick hits to join up on. So on Cyrus Says, Cyrus was joined by Olympic equestrian Imtiaz Anis, and Nishan Budla from the Triangle Offense podcast showed up on Thursday's Cock and Bull to talk about the NBA Finals. On Nankari, Sadaf and Archie were joined by Keshav Chaturvedi of the Tere Mere Raste podcast. On Storytellers and Storytellers, Vineet talks to Ashim Mathur from Dolby. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram to keep up with what's going on the network. And with that, let me also just finally thank our sponsors. They're what makes things possible. We'd like to thank CIET, CRED, Global Victoria, Bank of Baroda, Intuit India, and Lenovo. Thank you so much for making this possible.
So carrying on from what we were discussing before, India does have surveillance capacity. We have put them into use. There have been funding issues that we are aware of. INSACOG had asked for a set of funding, but that all of that has not come through yet. Priyal, you want to add something?
I had a question. When you say genomic surveillance and the samples that are taken to check effect of Delta variant and all these other variants on a population, are you concentrating on the samples that have death in patients or extremely serious cases, or even mild cases and asymptomatic cases also considered while you're doing the surveillance?
That's a great question, Priyal. As I said, I don't know what is the strategy behind picking the samples. And it's one thing that has been hotly debated in the scientific community. So there's two ways we can address the capacity issues of genomic surveillance. One is to say that we are going to increase capacity so that we are now actually looking at our target of 5%. Or by saying that, okay, we are only operating at a lower capacity. How can we best use this capacity? And in that case, how do we know that the samples that we are getting are providing us with the best chance to look at variants? So one way is, do we go back to the medical analysis of the patient and see if there was something different there? For example, we know with the second wave, there were a lot of cases where the RT-PCR test kept on coming negative, and people had to actually switch to looking at lung CT scans, like the HR-CT scans, to see if there was a COVID infection. When you start seeing cases like that, those seem primed to be checked for the possibility of variants. But that requires a lot of crosstalk between the diagnostic centers on the ground, the doctors who are treating, as well as whoever is collecting the samples for sequencing, and then whoever is figuring out the public health response. This is actually why doing genomic surveillance makes sense also, because we want to catch a failure of a diagnostic kit early on, right? Because otherwise we'll just keep on missing cases. People will be told that they're negative. I don't know how this will act out in an asymptomatic infection. A lot of our data is now based on the fact that we had this really bad wave that caused a lot of deaths, right? So to be honest, I don't know the answer of your question of how India is currently finding out which samples to send, rather how those samples are identified. and what all information goes into the identification, or whether they're just routinely picking up at random samples. If we are at random, it is really essential that we pick the 5% and not operate at a suboptimal level.
Hi, I would like to just add one point to this. So, what is clear is that the Integrated Disease Surveillance Program, that is the IDSP, it has machinery until the level of districts. So, this particular agency is responsible for the collection of samples and transportation from the district laboratories to the designated sequencing center. This is the only information that is available for the public. We are not, as somebody mentioned, we are not privy to the information related to the strategy of how these actual random samples are chosen.
So the other thing obviously to think about here is as well as the timing of catching a variant, right? Random sampling makes sense because you want to catch a variant before it becomes so widespread that enough of the medical community starts seeing cases which are different in their manifestation. Where random sampling makes sense, it is I think a comparison would be when you're looking at the RT-PCR test, we are seeing this adoption of sewage testing, where instead of doing individual testing, scientists can take sewage water from a community and look at the load of the coronavirus, of SARS-CoV-2. And what that allows them to do is preempt how fast the virus is spreading in a community and be able to predict whether this is going to be a bigger outbreak or not, and what kind of local measures can be taken. In a similar terms, genomic surveillance needs to be an ongoing process. It should be random as much as possible, ensuring that frequency is high enough that we are catching new variants as and when they come, and we're not waiting for a report from our public health response saying that, hey, something different is happening here, we should look into it. So I think the way to work for this to work is if we can preempt the variant rather than waiting for it to show up and then go figuring out and chasing after it.
Thanks, Shambhavi. So, recently held a workshop of the Health and Life Science program that is run at Takshashila. The participants were actually asked to come up with certain policy solutions to it. Can you tell us anything that came out of this particular activity?
Sure. So the way we approach any policy problem is obviously to look at what is currently being done and how do we figure out like alternatives for how we improve capacity, and then we do a comparison. I think the participants themselves are writing up the work that they did. So I won't focus a lot on what they said, but we'll just have a walk through the possible ways for India to improve genomic surveillance. One, at this point of time, we are not leveraging our private sector at all, or rather to a very small extent through the labs of INSACOG. We really need to expand that. This was a mistake that I think we made early on as well with COVID testing, where we initially kind of limited COVID testing only to government labs, did not allow private labs, did not leverage that capacity for multiple reasons. But I think one thing that we have learned from there is that if we do not catch and contain SARS-CoV-2 quick enough, then it can cause a lot of damage. So I think taking lessons from that, it is important we leverage capacity as much as we can. The cons that have been projected for this is that what about sample quality? What if there's information being leaked by private labs? Would that cause undue concern in the public if there is a new variant that is detected but is not characterized? But just the fact that there's a new variant, will that scare people, etc.? And I think we can come up with mitigating policies to stop this kind of damage. But if we look at the benefit to cost of including private sector capacity, at this point of time, it is really, really essential that we increase our sequencing capacity to 5%. We can't keep it at where it is just because we are afraid that there might be an information leak. The one thing obviously that has to be done for this to work is to have a detailed protocol on the strategy of sampling. So who gets to sample? Will they be funneled through the ICMR, which has been the nodal agency so far? Where does all of the data get reported? Do we have enough data policies to protect the privacy of people who are giving the samples? Because if we are looking also at medical information of the patient when collecting a sample, what happens to that? So there are a lot of questions that need to be answered, no doubt about it. But I think in the long-term context of things, it is important that we focus on increasing capacity and mitigating questions around the use of private sector here, instead of saying that because of all of these questions, we're not going to involve the private sector at all. So there is one possible way, that we can increase capacity. The other is obviously, again, in the long term, is to start some sort of global consortium and either work with countries in our neighborhood or other countries which have spare capacity. This will obviously take a bit longer for the samples to be sent, sequenced, and come back. But if we can actually leverage the opportunity to create a sort of cluster of labs just across our subcontinent, for example, we can use this for repeated and continuous monitoring of other diseases as well. So, not just COVID 19 and not just this pandemic, but in the future, if there is another emerging threat that is happening anywhere in our region, we might be able to leverage this capacity to contain it very, very quickly. As we've seen with the Delta variant, right? It's not just that it was first documented in India and then it stayed in India. No, it went everywhere. So this is a global crisis, and any further pandemics will also be global crises of the same nature. So it makes sense for us to now invest in working with other countries to create a sort of a global linkage. In the short term, help us with looking at emerging variants in India, but also help us keep a track of emerging variants or emerging new threats, new pathogens anywhere across the world. So those are two ways in which we can definitely start leveraging existing capacity. The other ways are obviously to increase capacity, right? Is to buy more sequencing machines, train more people, a lot more investment there in terms of funding and time required to actually achieve this. But that could be a long-term plan that every state, every district might have some sort of sequencing capacity to ensure that any further cases, again, beyond SARS-CoV-2, can be captured. We could upgrade our Sentinel centers, which are doing the integrated disease surveillance monitoring as part of the integrated disease surveillance program, to have these sequencers, have people trained on them to be able to catch variants quickly. But that's more a long-term kind of solution than something that we can do to increase capacity quickly.
Right. So I want to ask another thing is like, are there any other strategies that can be used apart from genomic surveillance to detect new variants, or this is, as we say for the RT-PCR, this is the gold standard. So is genomic surveillance the only gold standard technique we have, or are there any other auxiliary or supplementary techniques?
As far as I know, genomic sequencing is the gold standard. It's been done by all the countries. I am not sure if there are any new technologies that are coming through, whether we can use AI or any other emerging tech to keep a hold on new variants. I really don't know that, Ruturaj. But yeah, I welcome your thoughts or Priya's thoughts on this.
Also, Ruturaj, I had a question. This genomic sequencing is done on DNA samples, right? If I'm not wrong.
Yes, you're right. But the coronavirus is actually an RNA virus. But before sequencing it, the genomic material, that is RNA, is converted into DNA by using reverse transcriptase enzymes. So the actual material that is sequenced is DNA. But what we are actually getting out is the real sequence of the viral RNA. So it's just a matter of technique. It doesn't matter what is the type of the virus. We can sequence any type of virus, and there is no difference in the quality of data, whether it is an RNA or a DNA virus.
I think finally I wanted to make a point because I know we are running out of time. Increasing genomic surveillance capacity is actually a long-hanging fruit. It is not going to take a lot of effort for increasing it. The question, I think, the more daunting public policy question is, what do we do with the data once it comes in? If we had known early on that this Delta variant is coming, and I think there have been some reports from INSACOG saying that they had intimated that there's a new variant, how does the public health machinery actually move into action and ensure that this variant gets contained very quickly? How do we communicate with diagnostic companies and check whether the currently existing kits are still picking up that variant? This is known to have happened, right? This is not some science fiction. I think it was in the East African countries where they created a diagnostic kit for malaria, which was you take a blood sample and you run it on a chip and you can see whether it's positive or not. And eventually the malaria pathogen, the Plasmodium, figured a way of escaping diagnosis. So they changed slightly their structure so it would not be picked up by the diagnostic kit anymore. And that's the real threat, that we might be missing cases or that we might get a variant that will escape vaccines. Rather escape vaccine-induced immunity. And that's where the real threat lies. And I don't think we really have good answers. on how that crosstalk is going to be enabled, and how do we use the data that genomic surveillance makes on creating efficient public health measures to stop further waves.
So thanks Shambhavi and Priya for this discussion on genomic surveillance for COVID variants, especially in India.
Thanks Ruturaj, thanks Priya. Thank you all for listening.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
Hi everybody, just wanted to ask everyone for a quick favor. We're running a brand survey right now and would really appreciate it if you could let us know what you think about the advertising on IVM. Go to ivmpodcast.com/survey and do let us know. As part of this, we'll be selecting 10 random participants and sending them some IVM swag, so do fill out those surveys.
We live in an age of disruption, of immense change in every aspect of work, life, and business. But is the old way of doing things truly dead? And are we ever going to stop saying the new normal? Join me, Varun Dugirala, on Advertising is Dead every Tuesday as I talk to entrepreneurs, leaders, creators, and change makers from across business, media, marketing, and beyond to dig a little deeper into how we got here, what we're doing now, and where we're headed. You can catch all the episodes of Advertising is Dead on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get your podcast from.